YouTube, my locals hosted a photon hypernova case tournament under the new ban list. For this tournament, I decided to play Runick Spright because it was the deck that I had the most experience with, that I thought also had the best chance in the new format. There was 4 decks that I considered to be real competitors for this, for the new format, and I'll go over that a bit later and also in more detail in another video. Make sure to comment down below if you'd like to see a video talking about the new format. But yeah, this deck took me to a top 4 finish, and honestly, I believe if I played it better, I easily could have got top 2 and possibly even winning the whole thing overall, but that was just down to lack of preparation. It was a pretty short time frame to be able to prepare for this, but I do think if I had to use my prep time a little bit better, I easily could have won. Well, not easily, but I definitely believe that the deck was powerful enough, and if I had have practiced more, I could have won. Starting with the main deck, we have the full Spright lineup for starters. There is some debate in the last format about if you would maybe run 2 each of these. I do believe that the full package is necessary now due to the lack of elf. This is something that's going to come up a lot in this video. I'm going to sound like a broken record talking about how elf is gone now, but it really does matter and really does have implications on a ton of the cards and the list as a whole. But yeah, opening up multiples of these is a lot more preferred now than it used to be, because whereas before you could just elf back either a blue or a jet on your opponent's turn, or even better, on your following turn, they would just sort of create follow-up as like an afterthought of your board, whereas now you have to be sort of more intentional with allowing yourself for Spright engine follow-up. So opening like 2 blue, for example, or a blue and a jet, or a blue and a starter, is a lot stronger now than it used to be. Or a lot more important now, I should say. We got 1 each of the red, the carrot, and the pixies. Honestly, I'm kind of thinking about either putting red or carrot. Probably not both because there's probably not space, but maybe on the side. But yeah, I'm thinking about putting these guys to 2. Carrot seems extremely necessary in the branded matchup, and if you open a bad hand and have to use it as a material, that feels extremely bad because there's just no way to get it back. Or like say they just remove it early, or you use it early, having no way to get it back really hurts a lot, I feel. And it also matters a lot for the Labyrinth matchup, of course. But basically going into this event, as I mentioned, there's 4 decks I wanted my deck to be able to handle. Those decks are Kashtira, Branded, Labyrinth, and Spright. Also thought there was a possibility of non-Spright Runick decks as well, but turned out I was the only person there running Runick. There was 40 people at this event, but there were some other Spright players, but no other Runick players that I noticed. Certainly not in Top Cut. Yeah, so just keep those 4 decks in mind as I go through my choices and like sort of view them through that lens. But yeah, I wanted to run the Spright Pixies for a couple of reasons. I feel like the Spright engine is a lot less powerful now without the elf, and Pixies sort of just gave it that extra bit of that extra layered protection, I guess, and like flexibility. I also think that this deck plays far more of a protect the castle than it did before, where you need to establish a powerful threat and also guarantee follow-up, and then like sort of protect that powerful threat, and Pixies really helps with that. It also helps you to live, which I think is a key part of your win condition, is surviving long enough for your advantage to really accrue. You really need to slow down the other deck's tempo and then just outgrind them. Lastly, we got the 1 smashers. I'm thinking that maybe like a second copy in the side might be worth it. You would definitely want more in the grind because it's one of your few forms of easy removal. You of course also have flashing curses and destruction, and those are really good. Or not flashing curses, flashing fire and runic destruction, and of course those are really good. But smashers is just the best form of removal you have. But then again, I'm not sure that you could ever run more than one even in the side unless it's a very slow matchup because opening multiples of these just sounds terrible. Yeah, you need the one, at least. Then on to the normal summons. Whereas most of us were running 2 Hyperia and a Cap Shell, we're now only on 1 of each. This is for a couple reasons, and all of them are to do with Elf. Whereas before, you could open up, say, an Hyperia and a Cap Shell, normal summon the one, get the draw, and then go into an Elf to use the other to get the draw. Obviously, you can't do that anymore. The other thing is, you would also want to have multiple because, say you open the full Spright engine, you would generally go Gigantic for 1, and then Sprint for 1 and Elf it back. Again, you won't be doing that anymore. So I just wanted 1 of each. So I will just open the 1 and then Gigantic for 1 after, if I'm not using Gigantic to get into other Spright cards. Lastly, we have a new addition to the deck, Soul Scissors. This is the last level 2 monster in the deck, and this card was honestly so great. This is basically your Wind Up Kitten replacement now as your repeatable monster removal, since, of course, Wind Up Kitten is no longer repeatable due to, say it with me, the banning of Spright Elf. So he's obviously repeatable, special summonable by his own effect. If you want to read him, I'll have the card text on screen. But basically, yeah, he can keep coming back from the grave. He does banish himself when he leaves the field, but you can circumvent that by using him for an Xyz. This is your new send off Sprint, because obviously the Runick Spright deck doesn't run the Nimble engine. Before, you would Sprint for either Hyperia or Cap Shell, whichever one you didn't open or Gigantic for, and then you would Elf that back. And again, you can't do that anymore, so now you just Sprint for this guy. That's also very strong because you're going to be going into Sprint a lot now instead of Elf. And he's so much more powerful now in this format because he's not going to get Bestialed nearly as much. Yes, Branded are still running Bestials, but far less of them than they would have been last format, and also that's just one of the decks that's actually maining Bestials. And the count of Bestials that Branded runs is generally less than even the tier limit decks were maining last format. But yeah, like this card was really crazy for me all day. You can get a lot of value out of him, and monster removal, repeatable monster removal like this is at a premium in this deck because you struggle to actually clear more than 1 monster per turn with your flashing fire. Next up, the Runick engine. Only 2 fountain. I think this is all you need. You can loop them, spoilers with the extra deck, but you can bring 1 back with Gary if need be. And yeah, 2 seems like the perfect number. 1 is definitely too few. Some hands you'll want to go 2 on the 1 turn. Some games you won't be able to protect the 1. Say it gets banished or something, you need that other 1. But yeah, 2 fountain is the perfect number. And you don't want 3 because opening multiples is usually pretty bad. Then triple Runick Tip. I don't think I have to justify this. This card is crazy. Then we've got triple Curses, triple Flashing Fire, triple Destruction, and triple Slumber. I think actually all of these are insanely good this format. Runick Destruction especially put in a surprising amount of work. It's obviously crazy against Labyrinth. I didn't play any Spright Mirrors all day, but in theory, like clearing their back row, clearing a Smashers or whatever, could come up, but probably not too great in that matchup. It's obviously crazy against Labyrinth. I think just looping this card and also maybe possibly being able to protect a carrot like can just win you the game outright. It's also very important against Kashtira because you can pop the field spell for one, but generally, more importantly, you need to get rid of Birth, because Birth on your turn basically invalidates your Fountain. On their turn, it's fine because their Birth will be Chainlink 1 targeting your spells. You can Fountain Chainlink 2 to put your spells back. But yeah, on your turn, Birth is awful, so you do need to clear that. And finally, against Branded, this card is really important because you can clear either the cards they set from deck off of the Albion Grave Effect, and I think there might be others that set them directly to the field. But more importantly, you use it to pop Branded Lost, so you can actually respond on the chain that their monsters are being summoned. And also Branded Beast, because Branded Beast is they're searchable out to Fountain. And you don't always want to use your Hugins to protect it, and sometimes your EMZ is clogged, so yeah, Runick Destruction to protect your Fountain. Again, you play sort of like a Protect the Castle strategy for this deck in this format, I believe. Or at least that's how I played it, and it fared pretty well. Lastly, Runick Slumber. This card is very important. I really like that it you can sort of use it whenever just to banish cards and like activate Fountain. And also, like, again, protect the castle. Slumber helps with that. Lastly, for the Runick engine, 1 Dispelling and 1 Smiting Storm. I was initially on the Golden Droplet as well, but and of course that card and also this card kind of suck. You're almost always only using them to summon. But I did find that running the Golden Droplet as well was just too many Runick cards. Like, you want to open at least 2 or 3 Runick cards. Those lead to your best hands, but sometimes they can also lead to your worst hands. So I did cut the Golden Droplet, and I believe this ratio was correct. This card is actually really good. Funny enough, I would have won my game 1 of my top 4 match by deck out if I had have actually activated this on my turn. He had 2 cards left in his deck when I passed to him. I very quickly put him on 1 card left in deck, but I could have, and I had Tip in my hand. On my turn, again, Tip to banish the 1, Smiting Storm to banish the last one, pass to him. I win game 1, but like I said, I think my personal performance held the deck back a bit. I think the list was great. But yeah, deck out is a real win condition in this deck. You got to remember that. It's not always grinding out your opponent's resources, or your opponent's on-field resources, and finally being able to get attacks through. A lot of the time it's just controlling the game and decking them out. Lastly, we have, or semi-lastly, we have the Go Second cards. Triple Evenly Matched and Double Lava Golem. Up until like right before the tournament, these ratios were swapped. I was running 3 Lava Golem, 2 Evenly Matched. But then it occurred to me that Evenly is great in like every single matchup I was afraid of. Kashtira and Branded won't have any negates. Kashtira would if they have the Adventure engine, but you can easily bait that out with your other cards or simply negate it. Even if they negate it, if you have multiples, you can obviously use both. I do think this ratio is correct. I think the Evenly Matched is the much better board breaker of this format. Yeah, not much I can say about this. These cards are crazy against all the expected decks. Evenly Matched less so against Spright, but I was less worried about Spright because I believed that if they weren't playing Runick, that I would just have the better engine, and if they were playing Runick, well, better player wins, I guess. So it would just come down to that. Also, if they were playing Runick, they could probably fairly easily play around Lava Golem, but anyway, this is a bit of a tangent. These cards were crazy, Evenly Matched especially. Oh, and just in case it needs to be said, bricking on these is sort of a non-issue because you just pitch them with Hugin. Finally, the 41st card in the deck, Messenger of Peace. This was a last-second addition, and it may seem extremely weird, running a single copy of a Floodgate card. What if you go second? Like, why would you run the 1? It's inconsistent. This card was crazy. So first of all, let me justify the 1-off ratio. You can draw upwards of 5 cards in a single turn, usually you're drawing 4. And like usually, yeah, with just a decent hand, you're gonna draw 4 cards, and that's after like deck thinning with the Spright engine. So you can very easily find the single copy if you're going first. If you're going second, I didn't want to run more than 1 in the main. 1 is fine because you can pitch it for Hugin. And if you're going second, you probably don't need to pitch any of the other cards because you're going to be using the going second cards. So yeah, the 1 was the perfect ratio because opening 2 would be a problem. 1, you could just pitch it with Hugin. And like if your hand is good enough or their board is weak enough, opening this going second is actually really good still, because this card is a win condition against the meta. Against Kashtira, they're only out as Fenrir, and I believe maybe like Dracosac. If they're running the adventure stuff, then they have more outs. But you can just use the rest of your engine to sort of protect it. Fenrir, you would actually have to like walk into letting them use it to banish it, because Fenrir won't be able to attack. It'll only trigger if you activate a monster effect. So you can just sort of like sculpt your game plan around that. Against Branded, their only in-engine out is, well, there's 2. It's Guardian Chimera and Branded Beast. So you can very easily just sit on this card and hold like any runic spell in your hand, and when they summon the Guardian Chimera, declare its effect, then you just chain the runic spell to summon a Hugin. On the chain, Hugin replaces. I mean, this goes for everything. Any deck that would try to remove it with destruction removal. But yeah, like summoning that Hugin on chain and just replacing it plays around like everything. They cannot negate the Hugin, they can't bounce the Hugin. They would have to like prevent the special summon itself or prevent you from activating cards on that chain, such as with Branded Lost, which is why I mentioned before that Runick Destruction is so important in that matchup. Because, say they activate the Branded in red to some, and you can see a Guardian Chimera coming, you Destruction pop the Branded Lost, and then they'll Guardian Chimera, you'll chain the other Runick card, and yeah. The other in-engine out I mentioned is Beast. It's Branded Beast, again, you just try to Runick Destruction, or on chain, summon a Hugin, banish. Your Hugins are obviously very limited, especially when you're using them for combos first. So generally you want to prevent it altogether by getting to a destruction and saving the destruction. You of course can also use the Spright cards to just sort of like negate the things. Like you could negate Lubellion with red when they're attempting to get the Branded Beast. You could freezing curses or flashing fire it, popping it before it gets the Branded Beast, or just chaining to it. And then if they don't have Lost Up and don't have Polyengrave, you could, of course, negate the Guardian Chimera. Unfortunately with that, they do have the opportunity to chain block, or not chain block. They do have the opportunity to chain block Guardian Chimera if you're trying to negate it with red, but if you're trying to spot negate it with the freezing curses, they do have the opportunity to dodge that imperm-like effect by Cartesianing or chaining Super Poly to fuse away the Guardian Chimera. So I do recommend sort of like preventing the issue before it happens. And also like just allowing saving that Hugin there for the Guardian Chimera. Because most builds only run the one Guardian Chimera. And once they're through that one, they can possibly loop it, I believe, but you can just sort of use your negation to prevent them from looping it. And yeah, you just build your whole game plan around Messenger of Peace. It's a win condition. In the extra deck, we have the Runick cards. 3 Hugin, of course, you can't run any less. 1 Gary, 1 Moonin. I was considering running Freki just for a card that you see in the side deck, but it never came up. I'm happy I ran these 5 exactly. This card is also pretty crazy against Kashtira because, as I mentioned, their only means of outing Messenger of Peace are targeting removal. So you just summon this and a piece, sit on it, keep gaining life, and it's kind of checkmate. But pre-side anyway. Of course, post-side they might have ways to clear it, but pre-side that's kind of checkmate. You could say, oh, Zeus is a non-targeting removal, but they will never be able to make Zeus under Messenger of Peace. Then we have the other important cards. double gigantic, and 1 sprint. There's might be an argument for 3 gigantics, right? And like as I get more practice against Kashtira and as this format gets more solved, like maybe that'll be the case. But for now, this was fine. There's nothing you super care about them ripping from your extra, except like arguably gigantic, but a lot of the time 1 could be fine. And Hugin, but like you can't run 4 Hugin, so. Actually, now that I think of it, maybe a second copy of Munin once the Kashtira players understand the whole Messenger of Peace dynamic. Maybe a second copy of Munin will be necessary. Then we have the 1 Mannequin Cat. Even in the main deck, you could just target a Dark and summon any of your engine or Soul Scissors or something. If they have an Earth, summon Hyperia. And something I mentioned earlier that there's actually no way of looping your resources, but that's not entirely true. This card's kind of crazy. It summons from hand, deck, or grave. So Mannequin Cat actually does let you loop your resources, but in sort of an awkward way. But yeah, this card is really crazy, especially with some of the side deck cards. And then 1 Onibumaru and 1 Jinbuster. Jinbuster finds its way on a lot of opening boards, and then Onibumaru is like one of your few ways of like quote-unquote monster removal. You're only getting rid of it for a turn, but a lot of the times with this deck, you just need to buy yourself a turn. One IP, this is probably the Link 2 besides Sprint that I summon most often. It can... it just sort of like gives you like another layer, another thing they want to remove. It combos with the Pixies. It was another reason I wanted to run Pixies, because a lot of the time you'll just go directly battle to try to remove it. You can just starter for a blue, add a Pixies, or maybe you have the Pixies already, and then that's out the window and they whisk through the battle phase. You of course can also just Slumber to protect it, but yeah, there's a lot of ways to protect this card, and it's just sort of threatening for them. IP into this guy here, Avramax, not only buys you a turn, like I mentioned, is very important, but is also like sort of a win condition. In Branded, their only way of removing it is Mirror Jade, and you can just sort of play around that by being able to negate Mirror Jade. Of course, they could set up a Lost, you can't, and do it on the Chain of the Summon, but again, you can play around that by removing the Lost preemptively. But even just buying a turn, it's pretty good. And against Kashtira, like, they really struggle to remove this guy. Then we have Dark. Dark was sort of here as a means of link climbing, but the main reason I included it was for the Sprite Mirror match, like playing against any other Sprite cards. Being able to Dark back their Sprite and get myself extra resources seemed really important. Especially just like Dark back their Sprite, go into Gigantic, have a 3200 Gigantic, that seemed crazy. But like I mentioned, I didn't play any mirrors. If Sprite is at all like represented in the meta, I do think that this seems to be an important inclusion. Lastly, some Summer Summoner. I was very concerned about running out of engine and not being able to loop my Sprite cards, which is why I included this. But I never made this a single time, and like in hindsight, I think it's kind of terrible. Being able to loop the Sprite cards, like besides Pixies and the Negators, isn't that good because you're just going to run out of targets in deck. Being able to loop the Pixies and the negation ones is pretty good, but I don't know, I would very likely cut this. Possibly for the second Munin, possibly for a third Gigantic. Maybe even like Unicorn to give IP added value. Finally, we have the side deck. Funnily enough, I only went into about like half of this throughout the tournament. The best card in it, the double Eradicator and the third copy of Eradicator. Trap Trick can not only be Eradicator, but also Evenly, which comes up. And like I feel like this is the perfect ratio because after turn 1, you almost never want to be seeing this card anyway, depending on the matchup and depending on how good of a position you are in. And like, say you open both of them, you could say Trap Trick's dead, but you just pitch it. Or like I mentioned, Evenly. But yeah, this card is pretty good against Kashtira going first. They rely on a lot of spell cards, and like their spell cards are your main concern a lot of the time, so that's quite good. Branded is obviously a very spell-centric game plan. I find like if you open this or draw into it off of your million cards, just being able to Eradicator plus like have a bunch of like engine can put you in a position to win the game. If you don't see how this is summoned, Gigantic goes to 3200 when it has a fusion monster under it. So in your standard combo, Gigantic will be 3200. Alternatively, it also goes to 3200 with a link under it, so there's that. Yeah, this card's crazy. Going first against Kashtira and Branded, and then I decided in whether I'm going first or second against Labyrinth. Obviously, if there's the Runick Mirror, like, you can see why this card's good. Next we have the Deck Devi, and again, Track Trick lets you get into that, so I can effectively run 6 of each of these, only taking up 5 side deck slots, and again, this card also gets made evenly. But anyways, Deck Devi was in here mostly for Spright matchups, and again, I didn't play against any of them. And also, if there is any, like, Flu loyalists, Flu is an extremely hard matchup for this deck, so this card is sort of lights out for them. Then we have the second and third copies of Messenger Piece in the side, sort of for going first in those matchups where it's the win condition. I'm not sure if 3's too many. It didn't clog for me, but in the future I could see myself just running the one in main and one inside. Maybe cutting it for another go second card, because you'll notice there's a lack of them in this side deck. Next up, Mannequin Cat targets Ryo and Chaos Hunter. This is for Branded and Kashtira. A lot of the branded cards actually need to banish. Branded in red. Their trap card, that's a super poly. The name's escaping me at the moment. Mirror Jade, the bestial stuff. So Chaos Hunter is actually a pretty good floodgate. It also helps if they're siding Cosmics. And against Kashtira, it's really bad if they can steal it with like Big Eye, but you can generally like negate the Big Eye or prevent its effect elsewhere. And preventing their banish is kind of crazy. Like Chaos Hunter alongside Messenger Piece is usually wraps for them. And then Ryo is my Spright matchup out. Not sure if I would even need to run this. I'll have to like test that, see if it's even worth the side deck spot, because like maybe I just Mannequin Cat for my own Spright card against them. But yeah, this was in here as a floodgate for Spright. This card's crazy against Spright. Then we have Ibli. It's also sort of a Mannequin Cat target, but sort of not. It's mostly to be summoned off Gigantic. This card is an insane floodgate. I don't know how it's managed to live this long, or why Konami printed it in 2019 or whatever. They should just ban this card. But yeah, summoning this off Gigantic, and then linking it away, putting it on the field of a Kashtira player, or a Branded player is crazy. Like, yes, Kashtira is running the double Lingribo because they run this card as well. But then they have a monster on board, and it makes their play really awkward. So like, and you have lots of ways to interrupt them. So once they have a monster on board, they're going to be making the really awkward plays, and you can like just stop those. Against Branded, like they basically just have to use their normal summon on Tribute Summoning a Bestial out it, because all 15 of their extra deck cards are purple cards. So that's just really crazy. I mentioned how good Evenly is. If players are running that, then this obviously locks them out of it. This card is toxic. Then we have triple Spooky Dogwood. Unfortunately, I think it's very necessary with this deck. A lot of people just don't know when to scoop, or you might get an unlucky turn of events and played a 25-minute game 1 that you just lost, and then this card is necessary because you're losing life points to starter. You're never going to be able to use your battle phase. Unfortunately, very necessary in this deck. Red Resonator, because it's a tuner. This card sucked for me. I think I summoned it from the deck a single time and resolved it a single time, and then 2 games where it's very important, I opened it. I actually had a draw in Swiss that should have easily been a win, because game 3 there was 5 minutes left and this card was in my opening 6. There was another time in my top 4 matchup, actually, I mentioned that I lost game 1 due to a misplay. We played game 2 with very few minutes on the clock, I think 10, and I opened this card again. But yeah, you have to run it. Unfortunately, this card hated me on the day, but yeah. And lastly, the only go second card we run in the side deck, the third copy of Lava Golem. You might notice that I'm not running the sphere modes. I think that 6 of the Lava Golem S cards would be too many, like maybe even 5 would be too many. I might consider cutting like a Ryo or Messenger for just the one raw sphere mode. We'll have to see how things pan out. But yeah, I did want the third copy here at least. And then, yeah, going second, I would often have 3 Lava Golem, 3 evenly. And then depending on the matchup, I would have like Eradicator, depending on the time left, these cards. Yeah. So that's going to be everything. I think my list was actually very, very solid. The only thing I would tweak is like maybe one card on the side, one card in extra. I think the main deck was perfect. I would not touch it. I went and played a regular locals with this after that case tournament, and I took first place there as well. So exact same list. I do think Runick Spright is a very, very strong deck this upcoming format. The only losing matchup is probably Kashtira, and I'm not even sure, like maybe with adequate practice that won't be a losing matchup. So yeah, this deck is crazy. Also off of this case tournament, I'm very excited for this new format. All the decks feel like very grindy and generally pretty fair. Like yeah, Kashtira is kind of toxic, but it's not super toxic against this deck specifically. So really excited to see how things go. And let me know in the comments down below if you want to see my more videos talking about this brand new format we're in. Thanks for watching.